Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal, Dahiya, and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues as well. Today, we're going to talk about self-reliance in the defense sector. Now, government has recently released the third positive indigenization list of 101 items comprising major equipments and platforms. Now, first such list of 101 items and second list of 108 items was earlier released in August 2020 and May last year, respectively. The spirit behind issuing these three lists, comprising 310 defense equipments slated to be manufactured locally, reflects the growing confidence of the government in the capabilities of domestic industry that they can supply equipment of international standards to meet the demand of the armed forces. Now, the third list comprises highly complex systems, sensors, weapons and ammunitions like lightweight tanks, mounted artillery gun systems, guided extended range rocket for Pinaka MLRS, naval utility helicopters, next generation offshore patrol vessels, medium range anti-ship missile and a medium altitude long endurance unnamed aerial vehicle, etc. So today in Perspective, we will discuss and analyze all aspects of this issue, which is self-reliance in defense manufacturing and the defense sector overall as well. And we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me first introduce them to you. Beginning with, we have with us Mr. Rajinder Singh Bhatia. He's joining us. He's the President and CEO of Kalyani Group. We also have with us Mr. Jayant Patil, the Director and Senior Executive VP, Defense and Smart Technologies with L&T. Mr. S.P. Shukla, Chairman of Mahindra Defense Systems and Mahindra Aerospace, and also the President of SIDM is also with us. And we also have retired Major General P.K. Chakravorty, former Additional Director General Artillery at Army Headquarters as well. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. I'll begin with the industry perspective first, since the industry representatives are in the majority on the panel here. So we'd like to hear as to what exactly is your point of view. And I'll start with you, Mr. Shukla. In terms of the steps which have been taken, of course, three lists, that's one part. The items in those lists, that's another part. But the most important aspect is that how is this going to change the scenario when we're talking about, more focus on self-reliance?
Thank you so much for inviting me. Self-reliance in this aspect goes well beyond just saying we will make this or we will make that, as you rightly pointed out. If we look at our current capital budget in defense, give or take few crores, 1,40,000 crores, it is almost equal to 1 month of GST collection in the country, which also hovers between 1,30,000 and 1,40,000 crores. Mm-hmm. Center, of course, gets only a part of GST, rest goes to states. So if you look at only center's share, we are talking about 2 months of GST collection going into defense capital budget. Now, this is not a small amount for any country. Mm-hmm. This has many perspectives. First and foremost, it goes without saying that when you produce your own equipment in the country, it does have its advantages in case of emergencies when you need it most. If any stories of Ramayana and Mahabharata, if you recollect, mm-hmm. very often you come across a situation that when you needed the weapon most, at that time the warrior was unable to use for a particular region. An equipment made in India will never put you in a difficult position because the company which is making it in India will be able to service it with both parts and service when you need it most. Okay. Let us keep the defense part aside. As I put in the financial aspect, imagine what wonders it can do if that entire money was used in the country for developing domestic industry. So this is the second part. Okay. The third part has always been about how much share comes to private sector out of our domestic production. So if today we are talking about 2/3 of defense procurement will be from domestic industry, we need to slowly increase the share of private sector in the domestic procurement. It has been around 15% so far, but target should be that over a period of time, it should reach 50% of total domestic procurement,
Okay.
so that both private and public sector equally contribute in the serving the defense forces of the nation.
Okay, okay. That of course is the target there, and that would make a lot of difference, as you're pointing out, Mr. Shukla. I'd like to bring in, Mr. Bhatia here from the Kalyani group as well. Mr. Bhatia, it's not only just about money; it's also about technology, and as Mr. Shukla was referring to, it's also about reliability of weapon systems.
Thank you, Vishal. If you take a look at it, technology denial will remain an instrument of foreign policy in all foreign relations. The recent war between Ukraine and Russia is again indicative that you cannot depend on anyone else to come to your help when the chips are down. You need your own developed IP, you need your own developed technology to take you forward. In technology terms, there was a very good saying in the past which used to say, what you need in terms of technology is not available, and what is available, you do not need it.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to create technology in-house to start doing it. This is the perspective in the Aatmanirbhar Bharat. It does not mean that every item, every bolt, every screw has to be made in the country. But what is important is the IP, the intellectual property rests in the country, so that you cannot be held to ransom.
Okay.
Till to date, the situation was that most of this work used to be carried out in public sector undertakings. For the last few years, there has been a distinct shift in the policy encouraging the private sector players to come in.
Okay.
And is that nation needs to put optimal resources together to ensure that we develop the desired technology and help our soldiers win their wars with Indian systems which are designed and developed in the country.
Okay. Okay, so basically both, private and public sector will have to combine their forces here in terms of, the capabilities, the technology development, as well as ensuring that, the required instrument or platform, weapons platform is delivered to the end user there. Mr. Patil, your views there in terms of, what is being done. We'll talk about specific, systems being developed and their utilization as well. But overall, when we look at the policy framework or, the enabling environment, which I was referring to and which Mr. Shukla and Mr. Bhatia were also referring to.
I think on the policy environment, we've seen last about 6-7 years a complete sea change which has actually happened. Prakash Shukla very rightly talked about the privatization was insignificant, and I must give you with numbers. Just about 7 years back, it used to be 5%. So of the Indian defense industry, which by itself was less than 30-35% happening in India, just 5% of that 30-35% was coming from private sector. I think what has genuinely changed is that if we have a national agenda, we need this national agenda to be taken forward, not on the basis of only the public sector. There has to be an involvement of private sector, and which is in addition. It is not at the cost of the public sector. And this is what has seen that over the years, from that 30-35% which used to be within the Indian industry, we now see it doubled over about 5 years.
Okay.
And the private sector percentage of that portion of indigenous, which used to be 5, is this year being targeted in the budget year to be 25. Now, this is a dramatic change, and what is going to be, to my mind, truly going to make a difference to this is IP creation. And for the IP creation, this year's budget provides 25% of government R&D in the defense to be spent on the private sector.
Okay.
So here's the first time that the private sector will start receiving funding, which till date private sector was putting it from its own pockets. Now, in addition to their own internal resources, government's funding to the extent of 25% will come to industry, and of course that will accelerate what we are going to be seeing. Now, this acceleration we'll see out of the 3 lists. You very rightly said there's a 101 item list now, major systems, major platform, major subsystem and building blocks. But similar thing of the past two, if we total up the 310 items of significant values and significant importance to the armed forces, which now are going to happen only within the country. And the time frame for this is 2025-26. So the financial year 25-26, just 4 years from today, we hope to be seeing very sizable amount of indigenization. And government's resolve that we are not going to import any of these items which are in this 310 item list, 3 of them put together.
Okay. Indeed, that becomes really important here and really crucial when we're talking about this issue, that is the defense manufacturing and indigenization there as well. Let's also understand the end user perspective, and let me bring in General Chakravorty here. General Chakravorty, we have had countless discussions, on this platform here about the need for modernization, the need for indigenization, and your view has always been that the time is now. So when we are looking at, these steps which have been taken in terms of these 3 lists which are out there and the weapon systems or platforms which are listed there, 1, how realistic is it? And 2, from an end user perspective, is this what the armed forces are looking forward to?
Thank you, Vishal. Firstly, I must very humbly state that all the 3 people have done a great favor to the armed forces. I have worked closely with Mr. Patil, very closely, if I may say, and Colonel Rajinder Bhatia. I cannot express the degree of intimacy we had when we worked, but you can see on the battlefield today, when I go to Ladakh and I see the K9 Vajra roaming around there, sometimes I wonder, because I made the GSQR, it was made for the deserts, not even for Punjab. And I still remember Mr. Patil and Colonel Bhatia walking into my office and telling the Koreans. So firstly, let me put it to you very clear. Starting with Pinaka, which I was involved, starting with all projects, the ultralight howitzer, which Mahindra has made, you name a project, I think, I'm not trying to, I think you better keep quiet about what I did, because it's not me, but I had a vision that I made for 2027. As rightly, I think Mr. Patil has just pointed out the budget of 25-26. I made it sitting in my office in 2009. Believe me or not, if I made it, and it was privatization at the highest degree. We had a seminar, Mr. Kostupa or somebody spoke, and he said that Pinaka is not going to get through and what have you. I was on tenterhooks. Believe me or not, everything has got through. And let me answer your 2 specific questions you've asked. Firstly, as far as realistic is concerned, we can go for much more items. I think we're given a very small list, 300. It looks very big, these 310 items, because Vishal, I've just written a book now, which unfortunately has got delayed because the printer has missed out the foreword, Future Technologies for the Indian Army, where I've brought out the technologies and what is the way for it. Believe me, the answer lies in private sector. It cannot be what sirs have said, 50%. I think that is no way. You've got to go in for, today when we look at the private sector in the United States, who's the public sector in the United States? The leader of technology. I think they have to take in the major role, and I would be something, then only can we reach there. I think the 310 items which you are getting very nicely impressed with, we have already been manufacturing these. Firstly, I want to make it very clear, I have been deeply involved with equipment, and even after retirement, where I thought I will just hang my boots, it's most unfortunate that I have to keep getting involved with the details of even GSQR, people, and the last book, as I said, now got into it, and I've worked out what are the future technologies right up to quantum. I come to only one answer, and that is privatization. You have to go in for private, and much more than what they are speaking. I think budget is available. Lastly, I want to say this. Mr. Patil knows more about the budget, but believe me, I have been walking through the corridors much more than anybody has walked. Literally between Sena Bhavans and all these corridors which pass the files. Today they are in a very comfortable state, but believe me, when the files have to be passed and walking through each thing, I would just very humbly state, the armed forces look to the private sector and know that they are there. I assure you in all ways. areas.
Okay. So that, speaks volumes about the role being played by the private sector and to be played by the private sector. Now, that brings me to the specific questions here to all the three representatives from the private sector. I'll begin with you, Mr. Shukla. In terms of, the platforms or weapon systems to be made indigenously and made available to Indian armed forces, where do we stand? And if you look at these three lists also, how much of it is, actually workable in the time frame which is being put there? Is this all realistic? Again, as I was asking General Chakravorty also.
Vishal, the one thing I think is worth remembering, no one can stop an idea whose time has come. Time for indigenous defense production has arrived. Policy changes of last 2 and 3 years in particular, accelerated changes, and last 5-6 years on overall basis have really led to government announcements being taken in all seriousness by newcomers, new industries who are coming. So I will divide my answer into 3 parts.
Okay.
Number 1, this is one industry which has one customer. Therefore, you do not set up a plant and then hope to sell. Because if you can't sell, what will you do with it? If I make a tank, I can't sell to Vishal. Therefore, there has to be visibility of path forward. Only then somebody will come and set up a factory. This is the first principle to be understood. Second, no one can do anything alone. Generally, there is a large ecosystem which enables you to produce anything. As simple as making a sports utility vehicle like a Scorpio, you will have 200 suppliers, some making brakes, some making windscreen, some making windscreen wipers, some making tires, tubes, wheels. 200 people contribute headlights, tail lights to make something.
Okay.
Same thing is true for defense platforms. So ecosystem is needed. And third, clarity that there will not be projects awarded on nomination basis to certain companies, mostly in public sector.
Okay.
Because then there is no point setting up a factory. If suddenly after spending few hundred crores, you discover that sab ho gaya, but order is going to public sector.
Okay.
Now, when you put 3 things together, you realize the importance of declaring these lists. These 3 lists give you the confidence that number 1, it will not be imported, it will be bought within the country. Number 2, budget announcement clearly says 68% will be bought locally. And number 3, government has announced its intention that not only we will buy domestically, within domestically 25% this year will be bought from private sector, and slowly we will make it 50-50.
Okay.
3 things that you see together, you realize that we are on our way to achieve what has been put in these plans, which envisages positive indigenization between 22 and 27, 5-year time frame clearly laid out.
Okay, and makes it very realistic as well when we are looking at, ensuring that what is being put into the policy documents is actually implemented on the ground as well. Let's quickly look at, one more aspect here, and I'd like to bring in both Mr. Bhatia and Mr. Patil. I'll start with you, Mr. Bhatia. In terms of the key focus areas vis-a-vis technology and weapon systems.
Thank you. Let me give my perspective on the subject. These 3 lists are actually an indication that today the establishment and to some extent the users have full faith in the capability of Indian industry. On the Indian industry side, I can assure you, if you see the progress Indian industry made in strategic sectors, both in space and in nuclear, the examples we have set are actually world record breaking. Actually, if you but the cost of sending a mission to moon is actually per kilometer less than running a auto rickshaw. Nowhere in the world this kind of development has undertaken, and we are masters at frugal engineering and development. When we talk about this 25% of the budget, you will see this will have such snowballing effect on the overall development in the country that will be phenomenal.
Okay.
Just to give you an example, on IDEX, which has started million flames in the startup sector, the total expenditure of the Indian government is less than 30 crores till today. Now, coming back to the point regarding the platforms, take a look at our own group, and I would like to give this example. We started on a venture to make an artillery gun just 10 years ago. Today, we have the largest capacity in the world, having bought out almost 2 major plants in Europe. And we have developed 8 platforms ab initio, out of which 2 are in trials with the user and with the foreign countries. Take a look at vehicles. Today, we have a portfolio of armored vehicles which is cutting across all, I would say, standard levels. And we have orders which are from United Nations, we have orders from Sri Lanka, we have orders from neighboring countries, and of course from our own. So I think Indian industry is fully capable of taking challenge, and these lists are only helping to propel us forward.
Okay. Okay. Quick concluding comments from you as well, Mr. Patil, before we bring this discussion to an end, vis-a-vis the focus areas on the technology part and on the weapon systems as well.
Vishal, on the technology front, I'm quite sure that a lot in the industry, people of, the L&Ts and Tatas have been investing for nearly exactly 40 years into technology now. I can make one simple statement that all these 310 items, if I have to look at, I don't see a challenge there.
Okay.
They are all something which we can do now or within next 1 or 2 years, projects which actually have been initiated, and there's no marks for guessing why. Because this is not a list which, Department of Military Affairs has made out of their own mind. There's been series of interactions. Those days when I used to be the president SIDM, enormous amount of debate has happened across these 3 lists.
Okay.
What was being done is wherever our maturity has been the highest and the best, it got into a prioritization in terms of list 1, list 2, list 3. Bulk of what we physically can do today, I can tell you about 80% of these 310 items is something which is here and now the industry can produce.
Okay.
And it's not one industry, it's right across. The balance 20% is where we are already on the path to physically building it, and that's exactly where one sees that time frame as to when it becomes active. And that's exactly why the time frame of 22, 23, 24, right up to 26, because the maturity and the kind of time it takes to physically take a product through a full-fledged trials and get it fully qualified, we know does take time.
Okay.
Now, this is precisely where those time frames are. So there are products which today are at prototype stage, there are products today at concept stage, there are products today at technology development stage, but there is a clarity that none of these 310 item list and probably a list 4 and a list 5 today is in the making right within the industry. So it's not a challenge, and Rajinder said it very right. I think it's confidence of the government that Indian industry is capable of doing it, and when it comes to need, I think the Ukraine example has only told us we cannot be dependent on anybody. And that's exactly where these items of this 310, government has today issued AONs in most of the cases, and the AONs total up nothing less than 450,000 crores.
Okay. Okay.
So it's a big number. Government is committed. They trust the industry. So 4.5 lakh crores worth of opportunities today exist on the table. For those who already have it, obviously they are going to be looking at a big kind of a picture. And those who are at some stage on that path only get a resolve.
Okay.
And that the market clarity that
Yes, that will further, ease out the scenario there and ensure that the enabling environment does help out those who want to push forward as well. But it's so heartening to see, the government making those efforts, and on the other hand, the private industry, the private sector also taking up the challenge and, sounding very confident there. Thank you so much, Mr. Jayant Patil, Mr. S.P. Shukla, and Mr. Rajinder Singh Bhatia, and General P.K. Chakravorty as well, for sharing your views and insight. As our experts were pointing out very clearly, this is a challenge. That is, when we're talking about indigenization in the defense sector, being self-reliant in defense manufacturing, and not only we're talking about small arms, but big platforms, weapons platforms, and technology as well. But as we heard the private industry representatives, they are confident to meet this challenge in the given timeline as well. And the end user, that is armed forces, is also seemingly looking forward to utilizing the platforms and weapons being developed by the private sector. We'll come back again with more details on this topic and several others. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.